The Yankees pitching lab must be stopped. Yes, they traded away Michael King, lost Garrett Cole to injury, and still haven't seen an inning this season from AL Rookie of the Year Luis Gil, and their pitching staff is top 5 in the league in strikeout rate, fielder independent pitching, and expected slug allowed. And on top of that, they've thrown the fewest number of pitches in the zone this season. So how are they doing it? Let's dig into that very question. I'm going to start this off with a more obscure name, Ryan Yarbrough. I think we place too much weight on the alphas when thinking about pitching development. Yes, the hardest thing to do is probably create cost-controllable starting pitching talent, but I love the grimier role guys making material improvements. That is the in-the-trenches pitching development I love. And in the most respectful way possible, Ryan Yarbrough is a bit grimy. He sits 87 miles per hour on his sinker, he has pretty large release differentials between a few of his pitches, and yet he holds a career ERA better than the league average. In about 40 innings this season, the Yankees have pushed him to his highest strikeout rate ever, around 25%, when for the last 4 seasons, he struggled to cross the 18% barrier. So what did the Yankees pitching lab do? For starters, they completely altered his primary pitch to righties. He threw 39% sinker in the second half last year, and this year he's throwing 31% cutter. That cutter is mostly inside for him, and the rest of his mix to righties is locked on the outer rail. Four-seamer, changeup, sinker, slider. So I think the look of what he's doing from a hitter point of view is pretty different than 2024. But wait, there is more. If we look at the grip of his changeup, we can see a subtle change in the orientation of the ball. And despite a small uptick in his slot, which usually leads to more backspin on a changeup and less drop, Yarbrough's changeup has 4 inches more drop this season, which is represented through a lower vertical break number. We can see this when comparing a pitch plot of his between 2024 and 2025. Watch how these orange dots shift downward. As a result, his changeup's whiff rate has nearly doubled, he's running a huge chase rate on the pitch, and it's out of zone a lot. Fangraph's Stuff Plus model upgraded it from an 84 to a 99. It's now roughly an average changeup that's punching above its weight due to his command. This Yarbrough orientation change is very subtle, but I think it gets at an edge that the Yankees pitching department has: seam effects or seam shifted wake. Now, I did a video on this about 3 years ago. I caution if you go back and watch it, it probably needs to be updated a bit. But I generally think I got the concept correct. And instead of getting into the nitty gritty as I did in that video, what I want to do now is just have you think about a 4-seam fastball and a 2-seam fastball. Why does the 2-seam fastball move more to the right for a right-handed pitcher, to the arm side, when the cue for a pitcher a lot of the time is just to rip through the ball? Everything is the same. The difference, again, is how the seams are oriented, and how that interacts with the air causes the 2-seam fastball generally to move to the right. That is seam effects. MLB organizations have seam orientation data, and the sharper orgs can build models and ultimately tools for coaches to use based on how an individual pitcher's movement will change on a particular pitch if he were to rotate the ball slightly in one direction or another. Let's take a look at an example of this: Max Fried's sinker. With the Braves, Fried had a pretty standard 2-seam sinker grip, right on the tracks. This year with the Yankees, he's moved towards a 1-seam sinker. He's kind of hooked on the inside of the horseshoe. Now watch with this 1-seam sinker from 2025 and how it spins. To our eye from this vantage point, it's almost like there's a seam that's locked. Basically a red dot that forms from this point of view. I'll rip through it again. Watch this part of the ball right here. When you go back to 2024, that seam sticking on our 1-seamer didn't exist. Instead, we just got a pretty basic 2-seam spin, leather or white exposed to the air on either side of the ball throughout the entirety of flight. Altering how the seams of the baseball interacted with the air caused this pitch to have more drop. Fried's 2024 sinker averaged 8.5 inches of vertical break, and this season he's averaged 4 inches. Fried's slot is immaterially different, his velocity on the pitch is almost identical. All that change was how the seams of the baseball in the air interact. And I won't rule out Fried changing his cue on the pitch as well, but the orientation change is the primary driver. This sinker is now running a 79% ground ball rate to right-handed hitters, and he's throwing it over 40% of the time to lefties. Fangraphs Stuff Plus upgraded it from a 105 to a 117, an objectively better pitch in a variety of ways. The Yarbrough changeup and Fried sinker are a pretty good example of the range of the application of seam effects. For example, the Fried sinker, that 1-seamer, I think you could give to most arms who kind of cut the ball higher slot, need to create some drop on the pitch. It's not going to require a PhD modeling airflow around the baseball in your organization to tell you that. But the Yarbrough changeup, I think, is a different story. That's a very subtle orientation change. And I'm not entirely sure whether it was intentional by the people working on seam effects in the Yankees, but I do think there was a bit more of a deliberate nature to that. And it's a better representative of how teams like the Yankees are getting an edge on things like this. The reason this isn't just fiddling with grips is that it's attaching objective information of how the ball will move differently with the new orientation and how the new shape will affect a pitcher's results. And I'd theorize that objective process and the information behind it allows the Yankees to get ideas down to the field and into the game at what seems like a far more rapid pace than other organizations. And maybe it's in changeups, particularly, where the Yankees are finding an edge within their overall edge. Remember Luke Weaver last year? An orientation change there allowed him to skyrocket into a closer, alongside some mechanical changes, sure, but that changeup was a super important offering. We just talked about Ryan Yarbrough today as well, but it goes deeper than the major leagues for the Yankees. One of my favorite things to do is look at aggregated data in the minor leagues. So take all the information from Class A through AAA and smush it all together. It helps me weed through the, everything we do is individualized statements that you run into all the time with higher level decision makers. I don't disagree that many organizations are very individualized. It's likely the correct approach, but organizations have tendencies, which are often pretty clear. And for the Yankees, they love changeups. Their bullpen this year was built on this concept of having a lot of right-handed pitchers throwing either changeups or splits. And this year in particular, the Yankees are throwing more changeups in the minor leagues than any other organization at 15%. The average is about a third lower than that. I remember asking someone from the Yankees organization last year where they thought their organization was in terms of seam effects relative to teams like the Dodgers and the Rays, who seem to do a really good job in a similar vein, making subtle adjustments, getting it down to field level, and seeing results. And that source laughed and said that we are so far ahead of them, it's hard to even conceive. And perhaps that's cocky. I don't necessarily know how true it is, but I do have to say it's hard for me to disprove, based on the results the Yankees have gotten, that he was incorrect. Take a look at Fernando Cruz, for example. They tweaked his slider grip. Again, a really subtle change here. They climbed him just inside the horseshoe on his slider. It's now more of a traditional sweeper, and he's not using it as a pure behind and count weapon. It's kind of more mixed in its deployment. They also gave him a sinker, more of a traditional two-seamer here than the Max Fried one-seamer. And they also moved him over a foot towards the third base side of the rubber. And I know he's making a comeback from shoulder inflammation, but he's cut 3 to 4 percentage points off his walk rate and was on track to post one of the best seasons of his career. The Yankees also brought Carlos Rodon in on the one-seam sinker party as well, adding a pitch that is just an absurd amount of drop for his release point. And I'm probably missing other names in the past year or so who have made material adjustments. So how are the Yankees doing it? I think we kind of have our answer here. It's data, the ability to objectify seam effects, and take both of these ideas down to the field level such that you get orientation changes and very aggressive approach tweaks in a fundamental and process-driven way. And a lot of that integration, vertical integration, so to speak, from the R&D department, the people modeling this stuff down to the field level, relies heavily on people. Matt Blake has been the Yankees pitching coach since November 2019. Prior to that, he was with the then Cleveland Indians in player development for the better part of 4 seasons. And at the time, the Indians were basically one of the first organizations to buy into biomechanics as an edge. AKA, we understand the throw, or Driveline the throw, which is not unrelated to the player development company Driveline Baseball. Cleveland continually had the rap as one of the better velocity developing organizations in baseball. And true to form, the now Cleveland Guardians actually have the lowest four-seam fastball velocity in the minors in that aggregated data I was looking at. They are hyper-focused on drafting and developing and confident that they could get that velocity up. Sam Briend is the Yankees' senior director of pitching. He was hired just months after Matt Blake was hired. Briend's background preceding the Yankees came in the early stages of Driveline Baseball's rise to a stalwart in the industry from a development standpoint. Blake and Briend are routinely brought up as the two names that have a lot to do with the innovation and probably more importantly here, the integration of these seam effects ideas into development plans and ultimately to on-field performance. When I was poking around for who the mad scientist is in the organization, the one that's modeling the airflow around the ball and building these tools for coaches, I was met with a really funny response from one of my sources. He said, "I'm not going to tell you because we might be trying to hire them." And I think that is a pretty good encapsulation and honestly a testament to what the Yankees are doing. The league is taking notice and other organizations are trying to poach those individuals. And to some extent, the league has been successful. The organization did lose a lot of people this most recent offseason to other organizations, including a name who is routinely brought up as one of the masterminds behind all these seam effects ideas with the Yankees, Desi Drechsel, who's now with the Mets. And the Mets currently have the minor league velocity crown from the Dodgers, who held it over the last 3 seasons. So something is working with the Mets, and now they add a guy who was fundamental in helping bring these seam effects things down to the field level. I was somewhat skeptical the Yankees would be able to keep up their ways with all these personnel losses, and perhaps that will come back to bite them eventually. But for now, they're showing no signs of slowing down, and it's due in part to their prowess with seam effects. That's all I have for you in this video. The Yankees are doing some pretty cool stuff with seam effects, and if you want to learn more about seam effects, I'll link to Barton Smith's work in the video description here. It's some pretty heady stuff that Barton's done, but I've ripped through it a few times, and I think it gives you a general idea of how this stuff is modeled and the really cool work that he's done as somewhat of the grandfather of seam effects. So until next time, take care.